Looks like we're up to 38 participants. That's fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. We're very happy to have you here. It's a beautiful day outside and be a good day to be out branding, actually. Let's see if I can make this work. There we go. So this program is being offered as part of our 47th annual and our first virtual Montana History Conference. I think we all know why we're doing this virtually instead of in person. We were going to originally be in Butte, and so we just put that off, and we will be in Butte next year. So not only are we happy that you're joining us tonight, we want you to join us next year in person in Butte. We want to thank the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation in Missoula, who provided funding for this conference. They have been supporting the History Conference for many, many years, and we greatly appreciate their support. It means a lot to us. Oh, we have a number of other programs coming up for the next few weeks. Instead of gathering for a day, 2.5 days all at once, we've spread this conference out over almost an 8-week period. So go to our webpage that you see here and check out the full schedule if you haven't already done that. There's lots of great programs coming up. And I want to introduce our two speakers tonight. They're both on the staff of the Research Center at the Montana Historical Society. Our first speaker will be Zoanne Stoltz, who is the reference historian, as I said, in the Research Center. The information she wants you to know about her tonight is that she loves research and history, so she feels like she's in the right place. And I couldn't disagree with that. We're very happy to have Zoanne doing what she does. She's very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable, and is one of the people like Laura as well that makes working at the Society fun. Laura Tretter, our second speaker, is the Technical Services Librarian for the MHS Research Center. She received her degree in library science at the University of Washington in 2001. She's worked in state of Montana for over 9 years, first at the State Law Library, and she's been at MHS since 2015. I have to personally think that MHS is a lot more fun than the State Law Library, but I guess I don't know that. Her interest in livestock brands began with helping researchers trace their family brands and seeing the connections that were made. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we will seamlessly turn this over to Zoanne without any technical glitches at all. Right?
Oh, you bet.
Okay.
And there we go. Do you see a branding?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to sit down, hopefully sit down with a cup of coffee or something else and relax and just enjoy the next couple of hours.
So Zoanne,
yes.
Excuse me, I forgot to say that if you want to ask a question, just use the Q&A function or the chat function, and we'll keep track of those. And after both speakers will do their presentations, and then we'll come back after the break, and then we'll answer the questions then. So you feel free to ask them at any time, but we'll answer them a little bit later.
Where was I?
Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. All right. Laura and I are going to take turns speaking with you. For the first bit, I will be talking about the history of the brand records. And I can't tell you how excited I get about these amazing symbols of Montana. And then after that, some symbols and stories. Laura will take over, and she's been working on this routine for, I think, months and months, because, well, you're going to figure that out as soon as she starts talking. Then after Laura's finished, you'll get a 5-minute break, and then we're going to go a quick run through a brand search. Give you an example. So this is one of my favorite I love Ellie Huffman. I've got lots of favorites, but I like to point out that there is no fence in the background there. That's typical open range. Uh-oh. And guess what? I can't move. Oh, Kirby, any idea why I can't change the
Zo-
screen?
Zoanne, can you hit the right arrow on your keyboard? Lower right bottom. Is that not doing it?
Lower right button.
You'll find some arrows, left, right arrows, up, down arrows.
No, I know that, but they're not doing a thing.
So try clicking on the screen first.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank heaven for Renan. In case you haven't noticed, brands are everywhere in Montana. And this particular highway sign is outside, just east of Malta. And a duplicate of this is between Forsyth and Miles City. So good locations, cattle country. And if you don't believe that they are everywhere, I encourage you to walk down Miles City, or for that matter, parts of Billings, and look at people's belts because they have brands on them as well. Little bit of history for just branding with what I call scars, and other ways of equating symbols with a group. So ancient peoples, there's evidence that ancient peoples did brand cattle. There is evidence from Egyptian tombs that the Egyptians branded. The Japanese have a system called Mons, and they're amazing fabric creations, and they wear them on their clothes, and that will put them at a glance. Somebody else can tell where they're from or what family they're connected to. And then we get into the US. Believe it or not, our brand system is inherited from Connecticut as early as 1644, when the Dutch who were settling in Connecticut had brought that system from Europe. Then we do like to talk the Spanish brands, because talk about symbolism, they were all about symbolism. And of course, the typical example for that is the three crosses. And then it's just great Western American ranching history. It just doesn't get old. They begin as marks of ownership, and they become symbols and stories. And one of those symbols was shown to you a little bit ago. That was the Poindexter and Orr square and compass, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. So initially they're to establish ownership. So if there's a bunch of cows in your corn, you can see the brand, and you can call the game warden and say, listen, there's a bunch of cows with the lazy K hanging Y in my corn. Come and get them before I get angry. They represent then, on the next level, the owners and the families of the owners. And of course, eventually get very personal. There are times where, in fact, quite often I have found that they are inherited with a piece of land. For instance, Will James' two brands, when his ranch is sold, the people who buy the ranch get his brands. So lots of history, lots of tradition. And of course, then they become associated with specific people, places, and stories. Yep. People have always asked me, so I want to get this behind us, what was the first? And I liken that to Abbott and Costello, who's on second and what's on third, because there are so many categories. As far as my research goes, the first livestock brand was accomplished by Lewis and Clark in 1805. And this is what Clark says in his journal. By the way, there with the Nez Perce west of the Bitterroot. Wind easterly and cool, had all our horses, 38 in number, collected and branded, cut off their foretop and delivered them to the two brothers and one son of one of the chiefs. As far as we know, the first one used in agriculture would be at St. Mary's. The Jesuits, specifically Father de Schmidt, used the cross on the hill in the 1840s. The first brand authorized by the Montana legislature is the 84 brand. And during the first territorial legislature, a man by the name of Thomas Pitt was authorized to use the 84 brand for everything. He had exclusive use on 84, whether it was on a box of crackers or a mule. He got the 84 brand. He was associated with the vigilantes. His number was a nickname, but did not have anything to do directly with the vigilantes. And then the first registered brand in the Montana brand books, that's the first brand in our current system, is Poindexter and Orr's Square and Compass. Some dates that are important. And before I get any further, this is how I want you to think of your research when we get to that. When Laura starts talking about doing research, I want you to envision yourself sitting in a room surrounded by leather-bound volumes and old computer printouts, because that's what these records are. And that is why they're so challenging, is because we're not going to be Googling and clicking on the documents themselves. We have to go through and find the pages, find the names, and then go back and forth. So 1864, we become a territory, and it becomes law that people record a brand with their county seat. And as probably many of you know, at that time, it was really hard to find county seats in some counties. And with the open range, it was a little difficult because cattle would commingle. So in 71 and 72, the legislature passed a law that the brand office would be at the central location of government. So initially it was Virginia City, and now it's right across the street from the Montana Historical Society in the Livestock Department. 1870, also in 72, is when they start their organization, and we're certainly going to get to that. 1877 and 85 showed the influence of the open range era, and 85 is known as the cowboy legislature because there's so much legislature passed. This, of course, is past the time of Stuart's stranglers, and the violence involved with some of the cattle areas has convinced the legislature that it is past time to have brand inspectors and a brand commission. 1911, we're coming towards the end of the Homestead era in Montana, and everybody who comes to Montana wants a brand, but the brand office by this time has no idea which brands are still in use and which have been let go. And so people are mandated in 1911 that by the end of 1912, they have to record their brand. This works out so well that the brand office in 1921 decide that every 10 years, they are going to have a re-record. So that is why we will be celebrating the 10th re-record, 100 years of re-recording in 2021. The significance to Montana, or for that matter, any history, genealogists go crazy about brands, and they can be 2 or 3 generations away from the homestead or from the ranch, and they still take pride in that brand. Of course, it's part of our culture here in Montana, so it's certainly vital to Montana's story, especially when you start looking at the individual brand histories. There have been hundreds of thousands of brands recorded in Montana, and each one has its own history. There are no 2 histories alike. Then we have the historical trends and stories, and Montana's trends can be seen with the brands. First, of course, we have the Western ranches that are largely catering to the Oregon Trail as well as the mining fields. And then we have, after the Civil War, the cattle drives up to the eastern part of the state where they are mining the free grass. Then the railroads come, we have the Homestead era, and then our modern trends where we, after the big dry, we lose a lot of the smaller ranches, and we see a growth in ranches and certainly a diminishing number of people who have brands. And then we get into our modern personalities. And here it is. So for those of you, there are a couple of questions about this brand. And what we looked at earlier was little bit later brand iron. The earliest are just straight edges because they were the cheapest to buy. And so here we have the Poindexter and Orr square and compass. It's the first brand in the modern system, date back to February 1873. And anybody who has a brand that was recorded on that day will tell you that there were actually 155 brands recorded that day, not just Poindexter and Orr's brand. Then just one of those iconic brands, the Bar R. And sadly, it will always go down in history on the rump of this dying steer. The Bar R was the brand for Stadler and Kaufman, who ran cattle as far away as the Musselshell. Interestingly enough, and according to legend, Charlie Russell was working for Stadler and Kaufman. He would often visit one of their foremen, a gentleman by the name of Jesse Phelps. And one night around the fire, I like to envision a little old-fashioned camp stove. Jesse Phelps shares with Mr. Russell the fact that he's received a letter from Kaufman, and Kaufman is asking if this winter, which is the winter of 86, 87, is really as harsh as they're hearing in Helena. And again, according to legend, Charlie Russell says, well, instead of trying to explain that to him, why don't I just draw a picture? And it's that drawing says it all. Waiting for a Chinook. Then we often hear, often in joking terms, the 2-Dot brand. It was first recorded by George Wilson, who initially ranched in Jefferson County around Whitehall. And you notice his first configuration, it was recorded February 10th, 1873. The 2 dots are vertical. By the time he has his little town established, which is not far from Harleton these days, the brand is the same, but they are horizontal. And my guess is that's so he could use the same branding iron. A quick description of 2-Dot Montana. In 1900, Richard Harlow's Montana Railway, also known as the Jawbone Railway, reached 2-Dot. 2-Dot had a post office. At the height of its prosperity in the 1910s, there was a bank, a newspaper, hotel, a haberdashery, hardware store, and several other businesses. Currently, as far as I know, the town's only business is the 2-Dot bar. Then we get to people that are less familiar to us, but fascinating stories just the same. And I often look at some of these brands and I wonder what it felt like for someone who was who was saving money for decades and working their hearts out to finally get that brand and be able to put it on their own cattle. So this is Mr. Proctor. He was born a slave and then emancipated at a very young age. And he went to work for running cattle right away. He was one of the early people with a really early in the 1870s cattle drives coming up from Texas. And then he decided to settle down. And he and his wife were married, and I think, no, it's early, but they money and wound up getting a little ranch that called the Lazy MK Bar. And as you can see up there in the upper left corner, there is the Lazy MK Bar. And that was Joseph Proctor's brand. They lived out in the middle of nowhere, outside of Forsyth, miles and miles from Forsyth, until about 1930, when Mr. Proctor and his lovely wife decided that they were getting too old to be so far from civilization. So they sold this ranch and bought another one much closer to Forsyth. They had 2 beautiful daughters who are pictured there, and both of the girls, as well as Mrs. Proctor, took over the ranch when Mr. Proctor passed away in 31. She was ranching until she passed away in 1967. And as you can see, the daughters carried on the tradition. You have the bar MP that belonged to Martha Proctor. She recorded it in 1931. Then another symbol, and I like to think of this one as certainly the Proctor's symbol was, they had to endure a lot to get where they were and to have that piece of land. But here's the Carenza family from outside of Forsyth, outside of Sydney. And when they first came to Montana, the patron, Anastasio Carranza, in the teens, there were signs in many places that said no dogs and no Mexicans. And I can't imagine establishing a family in an area with that kind of climate, but he did, and he and his wife did it well. He started working for the railroad, and then in the 1920s, specifically 1924, the Carenza family is settled in eastern Montana, the Yellowstone Valley, working for the Holly Sugar Company, one of 400 families recruited by Holly Sugar. By 1935, they have purchased their own place outside of Fairview. And here we've got a brand for 1936. And then in 41, they were able to purchase another place outside of Sydney. Amazing, amazing stuff. So I have to tell you about this picture. For those of you of a certain age, if you get the AARP magazine, you may recognize Juanita's picture. She was featured in the AARP magazine for this winter. And I've been privileged enough to meet this amazing woman, and I just had to use her photograph. And then we've got a photo of Juanita, who's in the purple, and her mother, Margaret, who's in the blue coat. Her mother lived to be over 108 years old, but not before she went to Washington, D.C. to testify in front of the Farm Bureau and the FHA as to discrimination practices against minorities. And then just a few that might ring a bell. So first we have the Eve brand, which was Evelyn and his name's Camlin. Oh, I can't remember his name. Someone better remind me. Evelyn Cameron and her husband's brand. Down below we have the Yoke brand. That was Nelson Story's brand. Of course, XIT, and in Texas, and that's a little bit later brand during what I consider Miles City's heydays, because there were hundreds of thousands of cattle coming up from the south being grazed and fattened up outside of Miles City and Sydney and Forsyth in that area, and then they were shipped by rail back east and sold. And it always makes me smile to think that Teddy Roosevelt did ranch and have a brand here in Montana. He ranched in Dakota, but had a brand here registered because he ran his cattle here. But even after he moved back east, he retained those brands, and they were recorded from Oyster Bay, New York. I just think that's amazing. And then one of my favorite stories is the tuning fork, Ida Pound Bersha. Ida and her mother came from Wisconsin, eventually got on the steamship the Far West. And interestingly enough, it was during the summer of it was early in 1876. And they joined they joined Ida's father and her brothers. But she does not leave Wisconsin without her grand piano. And legend has it that there was not room, and it would have taken too much work to get the grand piano in the storage of the Far West. And so they set it up on the deck, and that she played for the passengers and the crew every evening. As it turned out, when her father and the crew are picking her up, they've got a wagon specifically geared to take her grand piano back to the ranch. And she had that grand piano then moved to Sweetgrass County, specifically Big Timber, when she married a gentleman by the name of Mr. Busha, and he was strictly a businessman. And at no time do I see that brand going into his name. It is always in Ida's name. So she must have been running cattle on the side of teaching piano. All of these are examples of brands and just not even the tip of the iceberg of the stories. And we can look at these today and we can learn, as Laura's going to teach us, how to look up brands and do brands histories because of a donation from Ivan Doig. He was doing research at the Historical Society and was doing brand research, and the brand folks are wonderful, but you've already seen a picture that they have leather bound volumes that date back to 1873. And if you do brand research there, you have to use those old volumes, and we just soon they not wear out. So Mr. Doig donated money that had the brand records from, and correct me, Laura, from 1897 to I think 61 on microfilm. And from the microfilm, they have been digitized. And now I am going to turn you over to Laura. And Laura, I think it's up to you to take over the screen.
Okay, let's see here.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe there we go.
That's fine. Current slide. Getting this. Okay. I assume everyone can see my slide now. And thanks, Joanne, for giving us that bit of history and that small glimpse into some of these stories associated with our brands and those registrations. And I just want to say right here, if you're a regular history conference attendee, this is where we're going to kind of depart from what the regular sessions are like. And because we were originally scheduled to be a pre-conference. And a lot of the pre-conference sessions move beyond the stories and the history and the research and go into some how-tos. And so I'm going to talk about the online records to actually prepare you to do your own research. I'm going to share what the records are, what they are not, which Zoanne's already been touching on, show you how to get to them, and look at how they're organized and structured, and then we'll look at a couple registrations as well. And like we're saying, we'll go back to Zoanne to take us through a full history, putting all of these pieces together. And you're going to hear us repeat things. You're going to see these slides repeated right here. I stole this slide from Zoanne. It should look really familiar to you. The thing I did change a bit are the dates at the top, the years at the top of this screen, to list the first decades of the volumes, the decades that we have available online. So note though that 1873 and 1991 records, we don't have those online yet. And of course, we don't have the 2011 through 2020 records online yet. We do have plans to get the 2011 through 2020 records at the end of this calendar year. And we are working on the 1981 through 1990, as well as 1990 through 2000 records. We've had a slowdown, and I'll blame COVID, right? I'll just say it. We lost some ability to work on them this summer, partly because of funding or money and unknowns, I guess we'll leave it at that, some of the uncertainties. But we are definitely would like to get them online, just not yet. But basically, these online records, as Zoanne has said as well, they're an unmodified version of these physical records, and that's why I put this slide back up here. We're going to keep reminding you to sort of visualize these volumes as you're using these records. It will help you at certain times. So just when you're using these online records, we have not cleaned them up. There's not this perfect database where you're going to put in a name, a date, a year, a brand, and get out this nice clean result that links all of these records all together. You are just searching through these pages. That's really what you're doing, scans of these pages. As you saw in some of the clips that Zoanne had, a lot of these registrations have notes and marks and stamps over the top of them, which is actually, it's really good information, and I'm happy that information is there. But it makes it so the computer can't really read all of the text on those records. But that's okay, because as we're learning, these records were created using a system to enable the Livestock Brand Office and the public to trace these records through time. So learning this history about the recordings, as well as understanding the organization, is going to pay off big time for you. So as we get started, before you dive into the records, you need to prepare a little bit here. And first off, I say you need to gather your information. You're going to want to list out what you know. Think about what names you have, what maybe are some common variations of those names, like abbreviations or misspellings. Think about, would the brand have been registered, say, in your grandfather's name or your grandmother's name, like with Ida? What would her maiden name have been? So kind of list all of those things out. Think about what town or county it would have been registered in, keeping in mind that county boundaries have changed since some of those earlier registrations. Think about the year range that the brands could have been registered, what had been the earliest, what would have been the latest. And you definitely don't need to start your research, and it's not even recommended always to start your research at the beginning or the end of this year range, but it's still useful to know this, have a sense of it. And then, of course, what does the brand look like? Sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't. And this is where I'll insert that one of the things we jokingly say, in all seriousness, is that grandma was often wrong. And by wrong, we don't mean that. We just mean that some of the details might be a bit off. And, you know, to be honest, like what I remember from before March can be a bit off. Some of those details are already fading. So recognize that what she shared, or even what you remember her sharing, is your starting point and not your ending point for your research. So use those stories and the details from those stories to help your search, but don't let those details limit your search. Ultimately, you do need a name and a brand configuration, one or the other, to use these records. The years and the geographic locations are going to help you confirm what your listings are, but without a name or a configuration, it's pretty hard to get started. The second point I have here is to gather your resources. And of course, these records, they're online records, so you need a computer and an internet connection, which you all have because you are online here with us. So I know you have some level of access to that. Of course, public libraries, the research center, other places have that as well. Also, we put together a couple of handouts for you, which we will kind of reference, and at the very end, Zoanne will show you how to get them. They're online, or we can email them to you. But one is a searching guide for the website where the records are, and the second is more of a guide to the records, really picking apart those registrations and deciphering what that information is there. And then, of course, we're a resource for you as well. We're inviting you to get started on your own using these records. But if you get stuck or you have some questions, you need some clarifications, we're definitely a resource for you. You can email or call us. We love to help people use these records. And then bullet point here is to gather yourself. And because what Zoanne said is, I think we missed that slide, Zoanne, that brands equal work. And you can absolutely do this, but you do need to clear some time for getting started. Don't try and figure this out if you've got 10 or 15 minutes. That's just not enough. I recommend giving yourself an hour, especially for that first time. So get your cup of tea, put your slippers on, get your dog on your lap, and treat yourself to doing some research. Okay, so as I get started, I need to talk about the Montana Memory Project, or the MMP as we often refer to it, because this is where the online records live. And I know some of you already have experience using the MMP, but for those of you who don't, This is a free online source for digital collections relating to Montana's heritage, and not just from the Montana Historical Society, but from over 80 contributing Montana libraries, museums, archives, and other cultural institutions from across the state. This program is administered by the Montana State Library in partnership with us. Other supporters include the History Foundation, the Montana History Foundation, MSU Extension Community Development Program, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Digital Public Library of America. Currently, there's over 180 collections on the site, of which the Livestock Brand collection is just one. So there's a ton of content here. Digitized materials include maps, photographs, books, documents, diaries, oral histories, audio, video, art, and of course, livestock brands. Many of the items, the materials, the content on this site are digitized versions of historic material, but there's also some contemporary stuff. So this is definitely a site to keep in mind as you're doing any research. So here is the About page, if you will, for the Livestock Brand Registrations for Montana collection. It's one of our 20 and counting online collections that we have in the Memory Project. As you can see, hopefully it's kind of a little blurry, but it's a over 60,000 page collection of historic livestock brands from the beginning of the recordings from starting in 1873 through 2010. And as already mentioned, we've got a couple gaps there with 81 and 91. We're working on it, and we will get the 2011 through 2020 records at the end of this calendar year. But before we click the browse button, I want to just take a couple minutes here and show you how to get to this site, just because there's two different main ways you'd want to get here, probably most likely get here. And I know not everyone's as comfortable with some of this stuff. So the first one, oh, let me just say too, I'm going to do this using screenshots, partly because I just want to minimize going back and forth between my presentation and any slowness or interruption that might give, so, or that might introduce. So just bear with me. I think this will work pretty well. So the one way you might want to get to this is through the Montana Historical Society website. And I do encourage you to go to our website. There's so much content here. So it's not a bad starting point. And if you're getting the handouts too, you'll be at our website already anyway. So if you go to mhs.mt.gov, you will get to our homepage. And on every page on our website is this kind of banner across the top here. And I think of these as each as tabs. They're different tabs for different programs within the society. And of course, we're part of the research center. So if you hover over, click on the research tab, you will see a menu, drop-down menu with online collections and finding aids options. So click on that, and then you get taken to this page right here. And down towards the bottom is where you'll have a link to our digital collections. So you can click that and see the digital collection page. This is a nice place that lists out all of our Memory Project collections. So it's a really quick way to get to those, as well as we've snuck in a couple other online collections as well, digital collections here. So at this point, you can click on Livestock Brand Registrations for Montana, and you would go straight to the online records. But the other way that you could likely get here is to Google, right? Just Google it. Google Montana Memory Project. If you do that, you'll get taken to the home page for the Montana Memory Project. And I just want to walk you through how to get through collections from here, because as I said, there's a lot of content on this site. So right over here, I've highlighted collections. So this is how I usually do it. I'll just go ahead and click on collections, and you get taken to this page. And this is hard to see, but this says we're 1 of 10 of 184 collections. It's just an alphabetical listing of what's the collection names. You could page through, but what I will do at this point then is to use this search box right here on the side. Go back, so it's right here. You can type your search term in there. I type in brands, you can type in livestock, whatever kind of sticks in your head, and it'll filter through all of those collections, so you just get this one result now, livestock brand registrations. And you can click on that title, and here we are, back to the About page. And now we can click the Browse button. And now we're here to the online records. Thanks for letting me walk you through that. What you're going to see here, I've highlighted in green that this is one that we have 30 records in this collection now. So we are now in the Livestock Brand Registrations for Montana collection. We've got 30 records, or you can think about it as 30 volumes here. They're grouped by year range and sorted in chronological order. Of course, the first year range is 1873 through 1910. And then when the re-report cycle began down here, 1911 through 1920, and then 31 through 40, and so on. You can change this sort order and other display options, but of course for this workshop today, I just want to stay with the defaults. Another thing then that you may notice as well, that within the year ranges, okay, 1873 through 1910, there are multiple records or multiple volumes, right? So for the year range 1873 through 1910, you see one volume of brand index by brands, one volume of brand index by name, one volume of brand registrations. Some years will have multiple volumes of brand registrations. Some years will have no index volumes. You don't need to really remember that, which years have what, but just kind of take a moment and see what's available for your year range or your decade that you're going to be using. So let's take a minute here though and talk about the index volumes. As I said, well, one thing to know is that there's only index volumes for 1873 through 1941. So 1951 forward, there are no index volumes, which is okay. It's just something to know. So for those first years, though, we have two index volumes available to us, the brand alphabetical index and the name index. The brand alphabetical index is an index of brand configurations. This index is organized by shape, letter, and number. So meaning like if the first character in your brand configuration is the letter A, you would go to the letter section in this brand index and then to the A groupings in there. If your first character in your brand is a heart, you go to the shape section and go to where all the hearts are grouped together. Sometimes the exact order of those three sections can vary between the different years, but they're all there. You just have to look a little bit. So when you look at one of these pages, you'll see that there are these hand-drawn sketches of the configuration with page numbers next to it. Understand though that each page number is going to be for a different registration. So for example, like looking back here in this page in the background here with this diamond shape, that's a lot of page numbers there. And those are not all for one registration, and not just one chain of registrations. And this is because a brand is more than just the configuration. It's just that a configuration, talking about the configuration is a really easy way to talk about the brand, or of course to group it in an index. When you register a brand, you register that configuration, you register the animal that it's going to be placed on, the location on that animal, and the geographic location. So a specific configuration could be registered to different people at the same time when that configuration is on a different animal, different part of the animal, across different parts of the state. Which makes sense because we know that the purpose of a brand is to keep track of those animals, and this can be accomplished even with the same configuration if those other elements differ. So this index works really, really well. We love it, but obviously you need to know what the brand configuration is, which you may or may not know, and it's not computer searchable. And so it just will take a little time, and you may have to look through all the way through a section, as sometimes brands will get snuck in at the end, tucked in at the end of sections. So it's a great index. Now let's talk about the name indexes, and we split them into because from 1873, 1910, and the 1911 through 1920 name indexes are handwritten, meaning they can be very difficult to read. I think even looking at the slide, you can get a pretty good sense that they can be hard to read. They can maybe include some more errors. They can be out of order, and they're not computer searchable either. They're collated by the first letter and then first vowel of the last name. I think this is, again, one of those times where it's nice to think about these as physical volumes, and say, imagine yourself in 1911 trying to come up with this volume and prepare for the next 10 years of registrations, and you sort of have to, so many pages for a certain letter and vowel combination, and it'd be pretty easy to underestimate how much you need, because you just don't really know. And so sometimes those listings get carried over onto different pages and snuck in here and snuck in there. Sometimes there are notes directing you to those sort of continuation pages, sometimes, but often there's not. And so these two indexes are extremely valuable. We use them. Just know that they're really time consuming to use, and sometimes you just have to just look at all the pages to know for sure if your name is in there or not. So moving forward though, from 1921, 31, and 41, because those are the only other years that have name indexes, those are typed. And notice that exclamation point, because this is a really exciting thing. I think you already got a sense of that from those two other pages you just looked at. You can get good computer search results here using these years, and even if you're just browsing, jumping in there and looking at the names, it's so much easier to read through, and they're in true alphabetical order, so they're a joy. Zoanne always recommends, if you can, to start your brand search in one of these decades that has this typed index. It's just going to help you so much, because ultimately what you're trying to do is to locate one listing, and once you have that first listing, then you can start moving backwards and forwards in the records. So here now I'll talk about the registration volumes. So we have the two index volumes, and then the other volumes in the records are these registration volumes. And these are little clips from the actual listings from these volumes. When I look at them, I kind of see they're all kind of the same, but kind of different, but kind of the same. You can see that each registration includes some bits of information. Sometimes we'll refer to an individual listing as a paragraph. It's just a nice way to talk about it, and it kind of it helps to convey that sense that each listing is its own block of information. A typical listing will include the brand configuration, of course, a registration date, a registration or certificate number, the name of the person or business registering that brand, that person's town and county of residence, later would be the county of range, the type of animal for which it's registered, and that placement on the animal. Some additional information can be included, such as re-record dates, transfer dates, names, page and certificate numbers. As you can see, it's often handwritten right over the top of it, or stamped on the sides of it. And if you're sitting here wondering, how do you decipher these bits of information? We have the handout that we keep referencing, we keep talking about. I think this handout is like, I think of it as when in middle school, when we would diagram a sentence, just pick it all apart. That's kind of what this handout has done for these registrations. Each decade has its own page in this handout that just highlights and confirms what each bit of information means, and where it can lead you in the records. So let's do a search. And by search here, I just want to be clear on what I mean by search. I mean, when you enter a term, search term into a search box and you get a list of results. On this site though, before you initiate your search, you got to make sure that you're on the right page. The Memory Project has different search boxes that search different content, different pages in that site. So if you got to this site through Google and you got to their front home page, there's a big search box right there, right front and center. That search box, though, if you put in terms in there, it's going to search across all those 180, whatever, 84 collections, all the content that's on the whole site, which sometimes is great. You know, sometimes you don't care where you're getting it from. You just want to see what's on your topic. But for us, we want to search the livestock collection, and so that would not be a really effective search using that front search box. So you need to navigate all the way to the Livestock Brand Collection page, and then use this search box right here. I have typed in my search term of Stoltz because I tried Tretter and there wasn't even one Tretter in there. So I had to go with Zoanne's name. Typed in Stoltz, and you can hit enter on your keyboard, or there's a little magnifying glass there at the end of that search box, and go from there. Here we go. We have a result list now, and I highlighted so it shows you your search term. You could add another, using the same box up here, you could add a second search term in there. It wouldn't be a new search. It would add on to this term right here. We went from 30 records, remember, that we had in the collection, down to 20. So there's still a lot of results here. Stoltz was tells Zoanne's a little more common name than I expected in the state of Montana. So what you'll notice then in your list is that you can get some name indexes. You'll get some registration volumes. You're going to get different years. This is where I think it is helpful to know, if you can, the year ranges that your brand was registered. So if you know it wasn't even registered before the 50s, like right away you can rule out some of these results right away. So what you're going to do at this point is look through. We've got 2 pages of results. Look through the results, decide where you want to start. I decided I wanted to start in the 41 through 50 registration volumes, because that's where I was pretty sure it was that my family member or some Stultz that I'm looking for registered a brand. You could start with the name index too. I mean, that's a really good way to go and just get those page numbers. But I just felt sure of myself and was going to go straight to a registration volume. So here we are. And what I want to do, though, looking at this page, I want to point out some different sections, I think, different parts to this page, because they are very useful to look at independently. So first, across the top here, and I've outlined, so I divided these sections with the green lines here. And so first, across the top here, I've outlined in red, it shows you the volume that you're in and the page number that you're on. And when you're really doing some research, you're moving between these different years and volumes, and just keeping track of where you're at becomes remarkably difficult sometimes. And so this is a really quick way to, like, I know I'm in the 41 to 50 registration volume on this page. It's just a nice check. Then this kind of main section of this page is the scan of page C551 from that registration year. I've kind of put the box around my results, why this came up: Harold Stultz, and from Jefferson, Madison County. And then over here in this section of the screen, we're going to spend some time here, is what I've referred to it before as like a navigation panel, but looking at documentation that Jennifer Bernal at the State Library, who runs this memory project, she's put together some great documentation tutorials and whatnot, and they refer to this as the page sorter. In that, for this software, this is a page sorter. So I'm kind of going to talk about it that way too, and I think it actually helps us in what we're doing. So what do we see in the page sorter here? I've outlined in red that we've got 9 results. So there's 9 times that the computer, remember that the computer found Stoltz in this volume of registrations. That doesn't mean there aren't a couple more in there, because as we've seen, things get stamped and handwritten over, but the computer found 9 instances of Stoltz in this one volume. You can see that this page is highlighted, so that confirms what page number you're on. And then also see that there's this red bar, this red line next to it. And I actually didn't add that. Afterwards, I thought I should have done my outlining in a different color, but I was committed. So this red line is the software adds that, and it's next to every page that has a result, your search term on it. So let's take I'm going to take a little bit longer here and keep talking about this page sorter, because this page, you need to get comfortable with this page sorter, because using this is how you're going to browse through the records and move them back and forward. And it's not really, it's just a little tricky. You just want to point out a few things. So I use the page sorter to browse. And I want to just confirm the way I confirm what's searching, what I was talking about when I talk about searching. I want to confirm what I'm talking about when I talk about browsing in this context. I'm not referring to that sort of casual browsing that we do on the internet, or like you would do browsing a new bookshelf in a public library. I'm using browsing in the sense of that action of moving through a structured file system, right? So to browse these brand records, you're going to learn you're going to use what we're learning about here, about how these files or how these pages are structured, and then you can quickly move through them. And it's a really great way to use these records. And there's 2 times when I move to browsing, really. One is once I find my listing. So I got my listing, the brand configuration that I'm researching. Sometimes I just stop using the search box altogether, and I just start following that trail. Those bits of information just kind of lead me forwards and backwards, and I'll just keep doing that until I lose the trail or the trail ends. And then the other time, though, that you're going to have to browse is when you don't get any search results, or the search results that are returned aren't for the brand that you're looking for. They aren't, your Harold Stoltz isn't in there. Just all these other Stoltzes are. So, and that happens because, again, you've seen a lot of how messy these records are. So the computer can only do so much. So sometimes you're just gonna have to browse. So on this page, I have 3 different sort of views of the page sorter. This first one up here, this is what you would see if you went to the Livestock Brand Collection page and just didn't do a search and just clicked on the 1931 through 1940 registration volume. So you knew that's where you wanted to go. You clicked right on it. And this is what the page sorter panel would look like. It takes you first off, if you go that way, you just get taken to the first cover image, which is usually page 1. That's displayed on the main part of the screen, and that's why this cover is highlighted here. So for this registration volumes, we see some sections. We see one section for re-records and one section for the new transferred brands. So say if you had opened up the brand alphabetical index, a bigger grouping for these contents. So let's say I know I'm looking for registration that is a re-record in this year. So I know I want to go to this section. So I will click that little plus sign and we'll get taken over to this second view here. Notice that plus sign is now a minus sign. This is kind of a common way you'll see where you're expanding and collapsing content here. So I've expanded the re-record section. Now I could click that minus sign and it would collapse it up again. But this is where I want to be because I want to go to page B251. So the pages are also kind of grouped together here in a collapsed way. So I'll click on that plus sign there and expand this page section, and then we'll get over to here. And now here we go to page B251. The thing I think part of why this is hard, like that makes sense, right? That all makes sense. But this panel here, like this is as big as it gets. It doesn't get very long. So there's thousands of pages in some of these volumes, right? And so you only have this little viewer here. You're going to have to use these little up and down, or yeah, up and down arrows. There is a scroll bar here that I've highlighted as well. They can be pretty, the scroll bar in particular though can be pretty touchy. And I end up having to just sit and hold this, hold the arrow, and to move up and down. It can be really useful if you know you don't need something in the re-report section, that you collapse that. If you're done with the page range, you may want to collapse that, just because you can kind of disorient it here. But if you take this time, which you are, to understanding how it's structured and organized, you'll get it. So let's see. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to look at this again. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to look at this Harold Stoltz here. We want to find another registration listing for him. We know we're going to have to use this page sorter, but that's okay because we get it now. So here we are. Here's our Harold Stoltz, and this is a reminder from the 41 through 50 registration volume. I know this means something. I know it does, but I don't have to memorize it because I've got this handout. So here's a clip, 2 clips from this handout, the By the Decade handout. As I said, each decade has its own page. So here's a little clip from the 41 through 50 page. And so I'm going to look at that and trying to find what that means. And I look here, compare, like, okay, this looks like this is the same bit of information. It has a number 4 there. So number 4, page number for the previous brand recording. In this example, the leading B directs you to the re-record section in the 1931 through 1940 registration volume. So hopefully that is making sense at this point. Another bit of information that we have on this By the Decade handout, and this is on the first page. As you get more comfortable using these records and looking at these registrations, you start to notice, like, what did that B is often there, and now we've got a C before a number. Sometimes you'll have a suffix number, like you'd have 251-5 or something. And so you know that there's some pattern there. And so this table here helps you to decipher that. So in this case, we've got a B. So let's find B here. It's in this prefix for re-records. Okay, so I know I'm looking for a re-record, and it's going to be in the 31 through 40 registration volume. You're gonna, though, often want to still go back to the full page handout. Like, this is a great shortcut. But sometimes these numbers here are page numbers, and sometimes those numbers are certificate or registration numbers. Mostly it seems to tie in with when they stopped using the index volume, because so you have index volumes for those earlier years, and so you have clear page numbers. Once they stopped using those index volumes past 51, they started now referring to certificate or registration numbers and not page numbers anymore. So since this is going backwards into the 31 through 40, at this moment we remember, oh yeah, that is a year that they have index volume, so I'm pretty sure this is a page number. If you had an E in front of a number, that's going to probably be a registration number or certificate number, because they're not referring to page numbers in those years. Again, you don't have to memorize this, you don't have to know it, because we've got these handouts here. This is just to kind of help you along the way. So okay, so what I've done here then, we've looked at this, we've kind of pulled out the handout. We know we want to go to the 31 through 40 registration volume. I used the page sorter here and went to the re-record section. Got to B251, and here he is. Here's Harold again, registered. He re-recorded that same brand. You can see the same configuration. You can see the same cattle, left hip, yeah, horses, left shoulder, yeah. Original. Okay, this is the same brand, the same Jeffers, Madison County. Awesome. that's how it's done, just like that. There's more bits of information, but this is as far as I'm going to take you. We're going to take a little bit of a break just so we can stop talking. You can stop listening. 5-minute break, 5-minute break. And then Zoanne is going to take kind of all these pieces that we talked about and just go through one search. And it's a really cool search. There's no two searches are ever exactly the same, but they're all really fun. And this one is a really good story at the end of it, of course, because Zoanne's telling us about it, so you know it's a good story. All right. I guess, so let's say 5:10. I'm looking at my clock, so say 5:10.
So Zoanne and Laura,
Yes.
first come back. Do you want to answer a couple of questions or do you want to wait until at the very end?
Are they hard questions?
I don't think so. I think,
What do you think, Laura? Should we?
Let's
take
do
a
it. Let's answer a couple questions.
Okay. Okay.
okay, we'll wait till we start though, right?
Yes.
No, it's 5:10. Let's do it.
Is it? Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, so hopefully everyone is back and listening. I'm going to share a couple of questions with our two speakers. And the first one is, do all of the indexes have cities or counties listed?
Yes.
See,
Well,
that was easy.
no. The handwritten ones do not have the county. It's not until they're typed out that they have either a county or the locale. Usually it was the mailing address, I think. As far as the handwritten, there's just a page number opposite the name.
Okay, a second question. Were there brands for the various tribes or native families?
Yes. Oh boy, that's a story unto itself. Initially, of course, the First Peoples were encouraged to be farmers and ranchers, and they were then, so families or individuals would have a brand, but in many cases they became a little too successful, and there was a period where just a government brand was put on all Native American horses, and then there was a time, I think it was, I want to say it's in the 30s, but it could be later than that, where essentially if a Native American had a lot of horses, he or she lost them. They were taken away. But there are some, I'm thinking of one, I think it's, I want to say he may be Salish, but it's a buffalo brand and it's just fun. And he is one of the last Native American brands. Pretty spectacular.
Okay, can brands expire and can others purchase them?
Ooh. Do you want to answer that, Laura? Or?
Sure. So that's kind of what we're talking about with the re-record. So if you don't re-record it in the re-record year, that brand is now lost to you. And then it would be available for others to purchase at that time, or you could basically record it as a new brand again to yourself. But if you don't jump on it, someone else could technically grab it. And that's really what the re-record years are all about.
With the exception of in 2010, that was the last re-record for one or two character brands. Shockingly, rustling is alive and well in Montana, and the single and double character brands were too easy for them to counterfeit. And now all brands that are recorded have to have three characters.
Okay, and this is just from Richard Galley. Not a question, but a comment. Just for fun, the British military uses the quote-unquote broad arrow brand for horses and equipments since the 1300s. This day on aircraft, ships, and weapons.
That is great information. Say it again, Kirby. I have to write it down.
Okay, it's the broad arrow brand.
Yeah.
The 1300s, it was horses and equipment. Today, it's aircraft, ships, and weapons.
Oh, that's great information. Thank you, sir.
And let's see.
I can jump into something that I see in the chat from HS. HS gave a really good tip about, it's basically about navigating in the memory project. There's a lot of navigation and little tips that I didn't share with you that will help you a lot within the records. And so that's where you can, I just didn't want to overwhelm and put too much detail in. I felt like I kind of was talking a lot as it was. we definitely can show you some more tips and tricks for navigating within the volume, in between volumes, as well as, like I said, some of that documentation that Jennifer Benil has put together. Don't feel like what I shared today is everything. It's enough to get you through the records and doing it, but there'll be more sophisticated little tips and tricks that you'll pick up as you get more comfortable using that software. So thank you for pointing that out, because I didn't mean I wanted to say that explicitly, that there's a lot more to learn there with that software.
Okay, well, is that a good transition to go to part 2 of your presentation?
You bet, you bet. So now I'll show the slide that Laura mentioned earlier, because I missed this one. But yeah, this is a photo of the Nighthawk. Of course, he would have been one of 2 or 3 cowboys who would have stayed up and watched the herd through the night. And of course, they were the only cowboys that were allowed to sleep during the day. But a picture is worth 1,000 words, and his equipment is all there. It's just pretty interesting. Okay, now let me, oh, excuse me as I go through Laura's, oh, let's see.
Earlier version of mine.
Yeah. Okay, where was I? There we go. Oh, that's yours. Oh boy, I may have lost mine.
No, keep going, keep going. Keep going. You'll get there. I just had a lot of slides.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. So as I get started with this, I cannot instill in you enough not to be intimidated by this, because there will come a time, if you spend time on these, you will realize that there's a wonderful rhythm and organization to these records. And the fact that this organization came about, figure between 1873 and 1910, is just astounding, because of the organization they did, our forefathers did. We can trace a brand back to February 1873 if it goes back that far. So I'm going to just show you the search, and this was one of my first searches after I came to work for the Historical Society. I had no idea what the lazy K hanging Y was, and if you don't, you're gonna figure it out here pretty quick. But a wonderful man called me and said that he and his mother were having a disagreement, because his mother, again, grandma's often wrong, but his mother was insistent that the brand they had belonged to a famous Montanan. He did not tell me what famous Montanan, but he told me to look under George Noble. So you've already heard that I like to start in the 21, 31, or 41 if the brands are that old, because they'll take you forward and they'll take you backward, and you're going to see how that happens. So there, you can see here George Noble, and here the lazy K hanging Y under the brand and mark, and they each have the page number 649, specifically 649-4. So because it's a number, it tells us that it was not a re-record, it was a transfer or a new brand. So I want to go to, I'm in the 1941 to 50 index. Now I want to go to the 1941 pages. 41 to 50 registration, page 649-4. And here's George Noble. And he recorded the brand, the lazy K hanging Y, December 42, cattle for right ribs, horses for right shoulder. And bear in mind what body parts we're talking about, because that gets a little confusing later. So as you look at this, and Laura's already mentioned this, There are 3 decades of information in this paragraph. We know that George Noble recorded the brand in December 1942. Over here, it tells us that he re-recorded it in April of 1951. And then we have this great page number. And that page number is going to take us back a decade to the previous record. So I'm in 41 and 50. I want to go to the previous record, which would be 31 to 40. So I want to go to 31 to 40 registrations, page 1915. And here we are, 31 to 40, page 1915. Interestingly enough, in 1931, Andrew Green re-recorded the brand. Then on the right, you see that 12, 14, 42. That was the first record for Mr. Noble. But we've got another wonderful number down here. It's going to take us back another 10 years. We're in 1931 and 40. Now, we want to look for page 1940 in 21 to 30 registrations. And here we are. Oh, did I get the right? I know that I screwed up. I had my page numbers confused, but no, 1940. So here is 1940. Ignore that, please. So we've got Andrew Green again. It's December 1921. We not only have a page number for the next decade, but we've got a clue for what to look for. We've got a Morse Heath that was transferred from Morse Heath. So we've got 2 clues, but we're not going to stop on these numbers as long as we're being fed the previous decade. So we're on the 1921 to 30 registrations. We want to go then to the 1911 to 21 registrations. And there it is, page 1940, found in 1912. So August Green originally got this brand, well, he got it on October of 1912. And we know that somewhere along the line, Morse Heath is going to show up. Now, as Laura has explained, the years before this, the index is handwritten and not what we would consider alphabetical order. It's a great system. They are the first consonant, the first vowel, and then chronological order. And it just is very time consuming. It's great fun, but time consuming. So now I'm going to go to the brand and mark index for 73 to 1910. And there's the lazy K hanging Y. You have the page sorter over here. First I went to letter brands, JK. And they're here. Here's a lazy K hanging Y. And then I went to the page sorter. And I'm not going to do this with you. I'm not going to torture you. I'm not going to go to every page with you. But if this were unknown to me, that's exactly what I would do. I would start with page 1837 and work my way into the future. We're not going to do that because we don't have the time nor the sanity. But I can tell you that after searching those names, I found that in November 1901, Morse Heath of Fergus County had that brand for the cattle and horses on right shoulder. And I keep going, and then I see a CE Price Gold Butte, Choteau County had the brand for the right ribs. So now I've got both parts of George Noble's brand. But if you notice carefully, it says on top, transferred to Russell and Price. And this, I believe, is the first record for the lazy K hanging Y. It was for Con Price. And starting in, I think, 05, he and Charlie Russell had a very short stint as partners in cattle ranching. So I got to tell Mr. Noble that, yes, indeed, his grandma or his mom was right in this case, that their brand at one time belonged to Charlie Russell. So we've traced it back from 1942 back to 1901. And for those that come after this, it's a prayer and a little bit more work. But again, there's this wonderful system that was set up by our ancestors. Now, Laura has mentioned several times that she has created written directions or clues, hints to the brand records. So to get to those, you just do a Google search. We can go back to Google now, to the Montana History Compass. And if you've not been on this, then you're past due. This is where we keep, the indexes is where we keep our list of newspapers. And there's more than you can imagine from Montana. But we're going to go to subject guides. And there are subject guides, second from the top. Livestock History Guide, third from the top. Livestock Brands in Montana Guide. You click on that and you get Livestock Brands. There's the page right here. And if you look further down that page, there are links to the search guide and then those tips that Laura prepared for the decade, because each decade's records are a little bit different and each paragraph tells you something a little bit differently. And every branding I've been to, we got to eat afterwards. And so I love this chuck wagon scene. And I hope that we have convinced you that brands are really amazing. And this set of documents, this set of sources is really a Montana treasure. And it just makes us happy when people want to use it. And we're there, it's going to be confusing to begin with unless you sit down a lot of time and a lot of patience. Call us, we will help you. And so again, history, family symbols, endless stories. I love brands. And there you go. Kirby, any other questions?
At this point, we have a comment, also from Richard, who says, during the 100 Years' War at the Battle of something in northern France in 1346, forces of the British yeomen and aristocrats were branded with the British imperial brand called the Broad Arrow. The first brand introduced, now for some reason my computer is jumping around. First brand introduced and used in the Western Hemisphere was the 3 Lacia crosses. In 1519, Captain General designate Herman Cortez landed in Mexico and settled down to ranching using this brand.
Thank you. Great stuff.
Okay, now we're going to have a couple more questions. Find them. Okay. Let's see, someone wants to know the path to the handouts again.
History Compass. And this is the home page for the Montana History Compass. This is a place where we had so much information and no traditional place to put it. And so one of the youngins in the group said, well, let's create a wiki. And that's what we did. And I'm on this site every day. But we want to go to subject guides. You're going to click on subject guides and it will take you here to the Montana History Compass homepage, and you'll look down to how to Livestock Brands in Montana Guide. You're going to click on that. And this will come up. It's a great picture of a branding. And I'm going to then show you the bottom of this page. And there are links right there that you can click on that will take you to both the search guide as well as the one that gives you details for each decade. How's that? Or you could email Laura or me and we'll send you the links.
So what can you tell us about how other states handled brand requests?
You know, I've deliberately avoided it because I've got enough going on as it is with the Montana brands, but I have heard that it's very similar, at least in the Northwest. Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas are very similar. But I have to tell you, I could not confirm that because I've not ventured out there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. During the sample searches, there were numbers that were in the registration information that you didn't talk about. Using one of the examples, can you tell us what those other numbers and letters mean?
Let's see. Laura, shall I go back to, I'm going to go back to Laura's.
Okay. No,
There.
not that one. Yeah, that's a good one.
So, Laura, I'll let you do this.
Okay.
But,
So what's that?
this number.
Yeah. So that, looking at this sort of clip from the by the decade handout. Oh, I don't have all the numbers. So if you were looking here, you would see that that is the registration or the certificate number. We've gone back and forth on how that's referred to for this brand registration. Of course, we got the date when we talked about this. Is the earlier recording of it. This you can kind of see is transferred stamp. So this is the date and a page number of the transfer for this brand. I'm going to take over the screen here for a moment, Zoe.
Please.
Yes. Oh, I brought this slide up too. Let me show real quick the history compass. You can get to it as well from our website. So from that same online collections and finding aid page, the history compass link is right there as well. So I always like to just make people go to our website and that'll take you right there. But let's see, I brought up the handout as well, just because we keep talking about it, but not looking at it as a whole. So this is the by the decade handout, and this is that table that I kind of did the clip from. But so this is a page from this handout, and so you can see like all these numbers. I've kind of highlighted them and then put a description down what it is. So number one, straight up, is the page number. Number two here, the date the brand was recorded. Number three is the registration number, and four is, the transfer. It's a re-record date. It's hard to see. Some of these are really hard to see, but that's how these records work. And so I'm just kind of scrolling through, and so here's how I picked apart 11 through 20. 1921 through 1930. So this one's got a lot of different numbers and they mean slightly different things. And so it's hopefully all there for you. And this is a pretty new handout. So as you use it, please feel free to give us feedback. And I've looked at it so often that I can't hardly see it anymore. So I could have been looking at the same error for, it could just be looking at me in the face and I can't look back at it. So let us know if anything's confusing or of course any errors. But if something needs a little more clarification, please do let us know. Try to be pretty thorough though. And so does that help for answering that question?
Okay. Patty asked if we have two character a 2-character brand now, is it mandatory to change it in 2021?
No, if families re-recorded in 2011, excuse me, they have to re-record that brand, but they're able to keep single and double figure brands. In fact, I know the folks at the brand office were on the phone towards the end of 2011 trying to contact people that had those old single digit brands, trying to contact them to get it re-recorded so it wasn't lost to history. But nope, you're good. If you've been re-recording, it's yours. Just be sure you get it re-recorded again.
So with the re-record, is that just Montana or is it all states?
No, we're just talking about Montana's system.
Okay, and the brand re-record is next year, 2021.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Someone noticed while horsing around that my family brand is also registered as an ornamental brand. What is the difference?
Joanne?
That is part of the culture, is how I look at that, because there are lots of people to whom brands were given or who have hung on to them, but no longer ranch or farm. And rather than have that brand for cattle left rib, it's just an ornamental brand. So they can use it on quilts, on belts, and that brand is technically still in the family name, but it's not a cattle. I would not call it a livestock brand. Does that make sense?
Here.
Another example of that is the Historical Society has its own brand, the M89.
We do?
We
did
do.
actually register it. Nice. I want to show you here. I brought up too. This is the Montana Livestock Department, their website, and they do have a little section here on ornamental brands to kind of give you some information about it. But they, of course, have a lot of great information about brands. And if you have questions about the current brands, you do need to go to them, honestly. We handle the historic brands, but they've got some great information, including like how to read brands. We didn't even get into that, about calling a brand. They've got it right here for you. So you can poke around their site as well a bit, but here's where they do have that information about recording an ornamental brand.
So Mary would like to know if cattle rustling is still a problem. This is in the chat, and Michael responded that rustling is very popular today, but it has gotten more high tech. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
The only thing, when I hear something like that, the livestock department, one of their conference rooms has the hide of a cattle, of a cow or a steer, and you turn it. That's how they determine if it's been if it's a fake brand, because somehow or other the scars are different, and they can look at it from the back side of the scar, and that hide's been around for a long time. But I do know that it's getting high tech, but it's still out there. It's rather shocking. It seems like it'd be a lot of work.
Okay, another question. What is the best way to search for a symbol brand? Ours is the hash knife, but it falls under cleave.
Ooh. Boy, the hash knife is one of the, that's a very iconic brand. And I would recommend, if your family has had it for quite a while, that I would look, if you know who may have had it in 41, I would look under that index, just like I did with Nobles. But if you aren't sure of the name, then I would get to 41 and find it in the brand index, the brand mark index, and then just look through the pages until you find the right body parts. But that's a great brand. Congratulations.
Another question about, just a reminder, this program will be posted on our YouTube channel. It'll probably take us till next week, but if you want to watch parts of it again, or if you have friends who missed it, it will be available.
No
The hash transferred from Wyoming. Does that make it easier to search for through interstate transfer?
Say that again, Kirby.
The hash knife also transferred from Wyoming. Does that make it easier to search for through interstate transfer?
Again, I just focus on Montana brands, and if it was coming from out of state, I don't think there would have even been a transfer. There would have been a new record. Does that make sense? Because the XIT came from out of state, and they had to record. There wasn't a transfer, but on the address it shows that it was, their address was the corporation.
Okay, I think that's all of the questions that we have. Very possible that I'm missing one. So if someone has a question that they've asked, you might ask it again, or if you have a new question, I think we still have a little bit of time. Let's see. So Robert Miller says, the Square and Compass brand has been in our family for many years. Was the brand different by county, or is there just one brand for the whole state?
Well, first off, of course, the brands are not just that in that mark or configuration, they're also what body part. And so there's going to be, throughout the state, there'll be left rib, left and right shoulder, ribs, and I want to say rump, but there are lots of different variations as far as one configuration. But I do believe, if I remember correctly, I call it a range, but usually they are connected to the county. And if you take livestock over the county line, you have to have it checked out by a brand officer. In fact, that was on the news that Governor Bullock waived that problem, or that mandatory check, because people were moving livestock out of the different fire areas. I think probably the Jackson Creek had a lot of livestock, and they were going across county lines, and they didn't have time to get an officer there to double check the brand.
So are two character brands allowed to be transferred to another family member?
As far as I know, yes, as long as you keep them in the family, and so they'll be transferred. It's viable now. And so let's say you transfer it tomorrow, then they have to re-record in 21, but it's still a viable brand. You bet. Just keep it on their books.
Looks like we need to do a session on cattle rustling.
No.
look into it more. I don't have any answers for it.
Yeah. Can you
Okay.
buy a brand from someone? Boy, that's
Question. Why did not more people create their new brands? Is it cheaper to transfer versus create a new brand?
I don't know the fees. I mean, that's where I guess looking at the livestock website too. They know. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that because I don't have a brand.
Yeah, and it's shocking. It's shocking how many brands there are recorded in Montana. And so sadly, it's hard to say I want Lazy Z rocking because it may already be taken. But you can transfer, you can buy brands, and that's where I asked one officer about it, and he said it's, that standard question, how much is a brand worth, and whatever you can get somebody to pay for it. But yes, that's done often. Did you see that, Laura? Cattle wrestling seminar.
We'll trust that that's a seminar about cattle wrestling, not about how to cattle wrestle.
I think that's a good clarification, Kirby. That would be fun. You could get into Stuart Stranglers and, that would be fun.
So there's a question like, what happens to those 2-digit brands that don't get re-recorded in 2021? They just are expired then, basically. They're not available.
Their
Gone.
history is done.
They're historical brands now.
Yeah. You're right. Right. And that's a good point. That's fascinating. Oh, thank you, Tammy.
Okay, I think we've answered all the questions in the question and answer. Anybody have any last requests and things they're just dying to know and have been afraid to ask up to this point? Okay, well, I'm a trademark lawyer and find this fascinating. This is a very early form of trademarks. Okay, well, if neither of our speakers has any final words they want to share.
Oh, wait, I see one more question. I'm not sure if we got this. I was just scrolling the Q&A from, it says that I inherited my father's brand, but not sure how to transfer them to my name. Assuming that means your father's not alive anymore. I don't know. I'm going to say it right now. It's a question for the livestock folks, really. Ultimately, they're the ones who deal with those, with the current records, the current registrations. I think that's it though. Now, there's your dog.
Yes, she has not had attention for 2 hours.
Yeah. Oh, but Kirby, you said, do we have any final thoughts? And no, I don't. Just thanks everyone for tuning in, and just ask us questions as you play with the records. We're hoping, this is just an interesting session, but hopefully this has inspired you to look up some brands, even if it's not your own family brand. There's still really fun records to look through and play with, and then just let us know how it goes, what you find, and what questions you have.
Okay, actually, here's a question for me. Somebody wants to know what time the next presentation starts and what it's called. So at 6:30, we're going to have Dr. Allison Lang talking to us about the imagery, photographs, and graphics from the suffrage movement.
Ooh.
So a different look at the suffrage movement and the role that political cartoons and that sort of thing played. So yeah, plenty of time to go grab a snack and then come back and join us at 6:30. And Joanne and Laura, thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.